Hey there, friends. It has been a little bit of a while since we've done one of our Wednesday health content writing live stream videos. So I really wanted to just come and have a conversation with you all today. It's going to be, sometimes we have more like tactical in the weeds conversations about health content writing, but today is kind of going to be one of those more broader conversations. That I think are also important to have in addition to learning about health writing for health professionals, because there are other factors and variables within our professions and our professional journeys that impact our ability to engage in opportunities like health content writing or other opportunities or interests that you might have in relation to your career trajectory. So, today in particular, I thought it would be helpful to talk about and to kind of spark a discussion about dependency and reliance on whatever your primary or like full-time healthcare role is. So whether you are a pharmacist, a nurse, a physician, a public health professional, or any other type of health professional tuning in, I would love for you to drop in the comments what health profession you're coming from, whether you are catching this live or on the replay. Just drop a comment and let me know who all's tuning in. But I think it's important to talk about how to create an environment where you are not 100% dependent on whatever your full-time healthcare job is. And okay, before we get too deep into it, I'll introduce myself because I know there are a lot more folks around here than there were the last time we did one of these videos. So my name is Megan Freeland. I'm a public health pharmacist turned health content strategist. And my professional work is centered around fighting health misinformation online. So I do that through two ways. I run Stock Rose Creative, which is a health content marketing company, and I also run the Health Professionals to Health Writers Accelerator Program, which is designed to help healthcare providers replace a portion of their primary income through freelance health content writing. Hey, Trishana, Lab Tech, awesome. So really great to meet you if we haven't had a chance to meet yet. I think that an important place to start this conversation is to talk about why this matters, right? Like, what are the potential pitfalls or dangers that come along with being 100% dependent, 100% reliant on your full-time healthcare job? I want to give a disclaimer up front that this is not a conversation that is intended to, bash full-time work or traditional healthcare roles at all. I am a public health pharmacist myself. I understand the value of healthcare providers and the healthcare system. And I also understand the value of having a full-time job. I've had times where I have had a full-time job while I was running Stock Rose. This is one of those times. And I've had times when I did not have a full-time job. So this is not intended to bash full-time work in any sense. It's intended to offer another layer of perspective, especially to folks who might not yet have that other thing that can help reduce that reliance and that dependency on that full-time work. So one thing that I noticed with health professions roles is that a lot of them pay well, right? So we know that with a lot of provider roles that they pay pretty well, and that something that occurs when you're in roles that pay well is that there's lifestyle creep, right? So if you started out making X amount of money and then you move into a role, like, so say you're in a residency or fellowship or some type of training program and you're making X salary, and then you move into a more senior role in your profession, right? That leap in salary can be quickly followed by lifestyle creep, where the expenses of your lifestyle, your living expenses, expand to fill in the gap that is created by an increase in salary and increase in income. Thank you so much, Karen. And that's not to say that like, oh, that's a bad thing or that we shouldn't let that happen, but it is something to consider when we're thinking about how much money it takes to live our lives, right? And the reason for that is because if there's ever a situation where that income is threatened in some way, then that means that the expenses, the living expenses that are required to continue living your life in the way that you have been, those expenses are much higher, right? And so, one of the potential areas of vulnerability, I think, for healthcare providers is that when the salary increases, that lifestyle creep happens as well. And so our expenses sometimes expand such that we don't have the room, we don't have as much disposable income or income for savings or other goals like that we would like, because our expenses have expanded to take up all that extra revenue that's coming into the household. Hey, Brian. So that's one thing that will be irrelevant a little bit later in this conversation. The thing about having a single source of income is that it makes you dependent on whatever the source of that income is, right? So if you are in a job that you love and that's wonderful and the environment is great and the people are wonderful and you love what you do and it's just great, right? That might not seem like such a bad thing. It might not seem like a big deal to be completely dependent upon that particular job or role for all of your income. But let's say something happens, like, I don't know, a pandemic or um, a change in leadership, a change in management, a change in your team structure, a change in the location of your job, any type of change, because change happens and often. Any type of change happens, and suddenly that situation that was once so great and so wonderful and it was everything you had hoped of and dreamed of, that situation could no longer be that, right? It could become an environment that makes you uncomfortable or feels exhausting or draining or becomes toxic, or where you feel like you can't grow. Any number of things, right, can change. Or maybe you just are looking for something new. That the fact that you are then dependent on that single source of income, in the good times and in the bad, that can create a situation where now that things have changed, that the tides have turned, it's not okay to be completely dependent on that as your source of income. Because if you then want to make a change, then that means all of your revenue is coming from that same basket, right? All of those eggs are in one basket. And if your revenue is not diversified and able to be pulled from different places, then you might end up in a situation where you can't adjust or adapt to whatever is happening in that environment. So maybe you can't leave. Maybe you can't find a new role. Maybe you can't be as flexible as you would like to be, because you're so dependent upon that single source of income in order to finance all of the expenses of your life. And I think that, oh, let me check a comment. Oh my gosh, Brian, yes. So Brian says the pandemic definitely put this topic high on the list of things to think about. And you're not the only one, Brian. Like, I've had this conversation with so many people. And I myself have been through this situation as well. It wasn't caused by the pandemic. It was actually around, I would say 2017, where I was in a role that was a full-time role that was okay. It was fine. And then it wasn't fine. And I had to take the time to learn a new skill and put the work into learning that new skill so that I could monetize that skill and then create a more diverse pool of opportunities from where my revenue was coming, so that I had the flexibility to be able to take myself out of that situation. And so I think that is one thing that is really important for, I think, all healthcare professionals to do, to be completely honest with you. When you get into a place where you're stuck and you feel like you don't have that flexibility and that freedom and autonomy to move around professionally like you need to, that can be really debilitating, and really discouraging as well. And it can also prevent you from having the space to be able to learn new skills, right? To be able to branch out and try new things that you may have wanted to try in the past, but just, for whatever reason, you didn't have the time or the resources or the money or whatever. But when you get stuck in that situation, right, and you're in a place of like negativity and not feeling good, that takes even more energy away from your ability to learn something new, learn a new skill that you would then be able to use as a different source of revenue. So, the topic of this particular live was how to become less reliant or less dependent on whatever your primary source of income is, like your full-time healthcare job. And I think there are two things that need to be a part of that process. The first thing is related to the living expenses topic that we talked about. So really scaling back to the extent possible, because we all have different responsibilities and priorities, right? But taking a look at those responsibilities and priorities and scaling back those living expenses so that if you're ever in a place where you need to quickly pivot or change gears professionally, you don't have to stress out about having to replace your entire healthcare provider salary, right? You don't necessarily have to replace that entire income if your expenses don't match up to that entire income. So let's say, for example, that you make $100,000 a year, right? If you make $100,000 a year and your living expenses total $100,000 or more, this is just an example. Then the math is not going to math here, but this is just for example purposes. If you make $100,000 and your expenses are $100,000, then there's no margin there, right? There's no room for error. If you suddenly need to replace that income, then ideally you're going to need to replace all $100,000 of that. But let's say that you're making $100,000 and your living expenses add up to about $60,000. Then, in theory, if a situation comes about where you need to quickly pivot professionally, you don't necessarily have to worry about immediately replacing that $100,000. Now the urgency is, okay, can I replace 60? Because that's how much my living expenses take up. So when I was at the point where I was um, ready to replace my full-time income with my freelancing income, that's what I was able to do. I didn't have to say, all right, Megan, we have to replace this entire salary. I said, okay, Megan, these are the living expenses that you have. This is what you need to focus on replacing first. And so that made that goal much more attainable and accessible for me because my income and my expenses, there was margin there. There was a gap there. So my first suggestion is to keep that in mind as you're moving forward in your professional trajectory so that you have that flexibility to be able to move around and prioritize if you ever need to. And then my second recommendation, and this is always my recommendation for most professionals in general, but particularly for healthcare professionals, is to learn a skill. Learn a skill that you can use to generate income. Doesn't mean that you have to use it to generate income if you don't want to, but having that skill in your back pocket will always be an asset for you. Because if something happens and you suddenly need to diversify your income or generate income from somewhere outside of your full-time healthcare role, then you will always have that skill set as an asset to be able to lean on. So for me, that skill set is health content writing. I could decide tomorrow that, you know what, I don't want to write right now. Like I just want to focus on other stuff. And I don't have to write. I don't have to do that. But the knowledge that I can, if I need to, is freeing, right? So whether the skill set you're interested in is graphic design or writing or I don't know, photography, videography, whatever kind of skill you are interested in, or you have a passion for, or you have started learning but haven't followed up with. Think about those skills that are ripe for you to grow in and to develop, so that if you ever need to fall back on a different source of income, or if you just want to start incorporating that skill into your professional trajectory now, you have the ability to do that. And this, again, this having this in your back pocket, think of it as not just like an opportunity for creativity and doing something different. Think of it as an opportunity to have an asset that allows you to diversify your income and your revenue, so that you are not completely reliant, 100% dependent on whatever your full-time healthcare job is. So I'll give one more example of this before we move forward. Let's check the comments. Camera skills. Yeah, the financial stress is real, Brian. It's so real. I'll share an example, because a topic that comes up with a lot of folks who are just learning about health content writing is um, some people will tell me that they've thought about starting a blog, right? A health blog, because as pharmacists especially, and as other healthcare professionals, we're all about patient education, and we want to make sure that that people have access to the health information they need in order to live healthier lives, right? And so I have so many people coming to me saying that I want to start a blog. Like I've thought about writing, and I want to start a blog so that I could use my writing skill to educate patients. That's fine. That is totally an option that is available to you. If you want to create your own blog and use that blog to educate patients, that is 100% an option. But my recommendation when we have these conversations is always to think about what your actual end goal is. Is your end goal purely to get health information out to people, or is part of your end goal to also make money from this blog? Any answer is fine. Either of those answers is fine. But depending on what that answer is, that influences what my recommendation is. Because if any part of that goal is to make money, then starting a blog is not really the way to go about that is going to produce the most immediate return. Now, freelance health content writing, on the other hand, basically writing blog posts or other materials for established health companies and freelancing those skills out, that is a way to also educate patients and also more quickly monetize the writing work that you're doing. So if a part of your goal is to educate and make money, then freelance health content writing is going to be a much more fruitful route for you than starting a blog on your own, right? So when you're thinking about what are skills that I can use to generate income, you also have to think about the entire landscape of that skill and how you would apply that skill in order to be able to monetize it. Writing in and of itself can go in a lot of different directions. So if you want to write for your own platforms, you're more than welcome to do that. But if you're using that as this asset, right, then applying that writing skill in a different way, i.e., through freelance health content writing, is really going to be a better way of using that skill to generate income. Hopefully that makes sense. So as you're thinking about the skills that you're interested in developing and honing, also keep in mind the question of exactly how can I use this skill to generate income, and let that be a part of your thought process as well. So I hope that these two suggestions are helpful for you as you think about how to become less reliant on your full-time healthcare role. Again, there's nothing wrong with having that full-time role. I know plenty of people love what they do. I love what I do. I have a lot of students who love what they do, and they're not interested in stopping that anytime soon. But it's always, always helpful, even just mentally and psychologically, to have that personal freedom that comes along with being aware that you have a fallback plan, that you have something else that you can use to generate revenue in the event that something goes awry in that full-time work. So hopefully this was helpful for y'all. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll get back to them soon. But thanks for tuning in and I hope you have a good night.